She was fired in front of everyone for being late again. Blood stained her sleeve, dirt covered her uniform, but she couldn't explain where she'd been. What the Vampire King didn't know, while he watched her get thrown out, the maid had spent every night fighting assassins to keep his daughter alive. The storm had left the palace courtyard slick with rain and scattered petals from the night-blooming jasmine. Myra's boots squelched through puddles as she hurried through the servants' entrance, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but she was already 2 hours late. Again. Stop right there. Mira froze. Head housekeeper Constance stood at the courtyard center, arms crossed, her silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into permanent disapproval. Behind her, a dozen servants had gathered, too many for a normal morning assembly. This was an execution, just not the bloody kind. 4th time this month, Mira, Constance's voice carried across the stone courtyard like a whip crack. 4th time you've disrespected this household, His Majesty, and every person who depends on you to do your share of the work. Mira kept her head down, pressing her left arm against her side. The bandage underneath her sleeve was already soaking through, warm and wet. She'd wrapped it too quickly.
I'm sorry, Mum.
The storm flooded the lower district roads, and I had to. Excuses. Constance stepped closer, her nose wrinkling. You smell like smoke. And is that blood? The other servants leaned in, whispers rippling through them like wind through grass. Myra's heart hammered. She couldn't explain. She wouldn't. The moment she opened her mouth about what really happened last night, someone innocent would die. That's how it always worked when humans accused vampire nobles of anything. I fell, Mira said quietly. On the way here. Cut my arm on some broken glass. How convenient. Constance circled her like a hawk studying wounded prey. Let me tell you what I see, girl. I see a maid who can't be trusted, who shows up late with injuries she won't explain, who sneaks around the palace at night when she thinks no one's watching. Myra's stomach dropped. Someone had seen her. But who? And how much did they know? I don't sneak. Enough. Constance's hand shot out, grabbing Myra's arm, the injured one. Pain exploded through Myra's shoulder, and she gasped, unable to stop the sound escaping her lips. Constance jerked back as fresh blood seeped through the white fabric of Myra's sleeve. What on earth? I told you. I fell. Myra's voice shook now, but she forced herself to meet Constance's eyes. I'm here now, ready to work. It won't happen again. But even as she said it, Mira knew it was a lie. It would happen again. As long as someone kept trying to hurt Princess Lyria, Mira would be there. Late, bloody, exhausted, but there. A heavy silence fell over the courtyard. Then Constance straightened, her face settling into something almost like satisfaction. You're right about one thing. It won't happen again. Because you're dismissed. Effective immediately. The words hit Mira like a physical blow.
What?
No, please. Collect your final wages from the treasurer. You have 1 hour to gather your belongings and leave palace grounds. Constance turned to the other servants. Let this be a lesson. Incompetence will not be tolerated in service to His Majesty. Myra's mind raced. She couldn't leave. Lyria was still in danger. The attackers last night had been different, more organized, better armed. They'd whispered about the next new moon, and when the king travels north, something bigger was coming, and Mira was the only one who knew. Please, Mira hated how small her voice sounded. Give me one more chance. I'll work double shifts. The decision is final. Is it? Every head turned. The voice had come from above, deep, measured, and carrying the weight of absolute authority. Myra's breath caught as she looked up at the second-floor balcony. King Aldrich stood in shadow, one hand resting on the stone balustrade. Even from this distance, Mira could feel the intensity of his gaze. He wore simple dark clothing, his black hair loose around his shoulders, but there was no mistaking the power that radiated from him. Ancient, dangerous, absolute. Constance immediately dropped into a deep curtsy. The other servants followed, their heads bowed. Mira sank down too, her injured arm screaming in protest. Your Majesty, Constance's voice had lost its sharp edge, now smooth and deferential. I apologize for the disturbance. I was merely handling a disciplinary matter with one of the human staff. I heard Aldrich's eyes remained fixed on Mira. She could feel them on her like cold moonlight, seeing everything. The dirt on her apron, the blood on her sleeve, the exhaustion she couldn't hide. Stand up, girl. Mira rose on shaking legs. For one wild moment, she thought he might intervene, might ask questions, might somehow understand that she wasn't just a careless, unreliable maid. What is your name? He asked. Mira, Your Majesty. A pause. His expression remained unreadable. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Continue, Constance. The dismissal in those 2 words was absolute. Aldrich turned and disappeared back into the palace, the balcony door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slammed door. Myra's last hope crumbled. You heard His Majesty. Constance's satisfaction was back, sharper than before. Guards, escort her out. 2 palace guards materialized at Myra's sides, their hands firm but not cruel on her arms. As they began to lead her away, Mira caught movement from the corner of her eye. Behind a marble pillar near the eastern corridor, half hidden in morning shadow, stood Princess Lyria. The girl was small for 11, with her father's dark hair and her late mother's delicate features. But it was her eyes that made Myra's chest tighten, wide, terrified, and fixed on Mira with an intensity that bordered on panic. Lyria's hands clutched the pillar so hard her knuckles had gone white. Her whole body trembled. Their eyes met for just a second. Mira tried to smile, to send some wordless reassurance, but Lyria's face crumpled. A single tear traced down the princess's pale cheek before she turned and fled, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Something in that moment felt horribly, terribly wrong. Lyria wasn't just sad to see a kind maid dismissed. She was afraid. Genuinely, deeply afraid. As the guards marched Mira toward the palace gates, past the whispers of servants and the knowing looks of nobles just arriving for breakfast, she made herself a promise. She was being thrown out of the palace.
Fine.
But she wasn't leaving Lyria unprotected. Whatever came next, whoever was hunting that little girl in the darkness, they'd have to go through Mira first. Even if no one else knew she was there. King Aldrich didn't return to his chambers after the courtyard incident. Instead, he walked directly to the war room, his boots silent on the marble floors despite his purposeful stride. Something was wrong. He'd felt it for weeks now, a persistent itch at the back of his mind, like a word forgotten on the tip of his tongue. The war room sat at the palace's heart, windowless and secure. Aldrich sealed the door behind him with a touch of blood magic, then approached the circular table where a 3-dimensional map of the palace and surrounding city hovered above the surface, sustained by enchantment. Show me ward activity, he commanded. Last 48 hours. The map shimmered. Reds began appearing like drops of blood on glass, each one marking a disturbance in the magical barriers that protected the royal grounds. Most were routine. A drunk vampire noble trying to teleport home. A merchant's cart with poorly shielded spelled goods. But 2 markers pulsed brighter than the others, indicating stronger magic had triggered them. The first appeared near the human market district, time-stamped at dawn yesterday. The second, much closer to home, glowed near the east wing. Near Lyria's bedroom. Aldrich's jaw tightened. He expanded the map, focusing on the second location. The timestamp read 3 hours past midnight, right in the heart of last night's storm. Show me blood magic signatures. New information overlaid the map. The signature near the market was human, but corrupted, twisted by something. The one near Lyria's room was also human, but clean. Protective rather than aggressive. 2 different humans wielding blood magic near his daughter, within hours of each other. That wasn't coincidence. Aldrich left the war room and headed straight for the east wing. The palace was coming alive around him, servants preparing breakfast, Nobles emerging from their apartments, the machinery of court beginning its daily grind. He ignored all of it. Lyria's door was closed. He knocked softly. "Lyria?" "It's father." Silence. Then, barely audible, "Come in." She sat at her window seat, still in her nightgown though the sun had fully risen. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she held a book in her lap that she clearly wasn't reading. The morning light made her look even paler than usual, almost translucent. "You should be dressed for breakfast," Aldrich said gently. "I'm not hungry," her voice was flat, distant. Aldrich moved closer, and that's when he saw them. 3 thin scratches on the left side of her neck, partially hidden by her hair. Fresh enough to still be pink, but already healing with vampiric speed. They'd be gone completely by evening. Ice flooded his veins. "Lyria, what happened to your neck?" She flinched, her hand flying up to cover the marks. "Nothing. I scratched myself in my sleep." "Those aren't sleep scratches." Aldrich knelt beside her, keeping his voice calm despite the fury building in his chest. "Someone hurt you." "Who was it?" "No one hurt me," but her eyes filled with tears, and she wouldn't look at him. "Please don't ask. I'm your father and your king. I need to know when you're in danger." He carefully moved her hand away from her neck, examining the scratches more closely. They were precise, deliberate, made by something sharp. A blade or a claw. "Did someone come into your room last night?" Lyria's composure cracked. A sob escaped her, then another, and suddenly she was crying, great, heaving gasps that shook her whole body. Aldrich pulled her into his arms, confused and increasingly alarmed. His daughter was brave, clever, not prone to hysterics. What could have terrified her this badly? "Talk to me," he murmured into her hair. "Please." For a long moment she just cried. Then, finally, she whispered. "Mira made the monsters go away." Aldrich went still. "Mira? The maid who was dismissed this morning?" Lyria nodded against his chest. "She keeps them away. She fights them. And now she's gone and they'll come back and—" Her words tumbled over each other, dissolving into panic. "Slow down," Aldrich pulled back to look at her face. "What monsters? What do you mean she fights them?" But Lyria was shutting down now, her expression closing like a door slamming. She shook her head violently. "I can't. They said they'll hurt people. They said if I tell anyone, they'll kill all the human servants. I can't.
Who said that?
"Lyria, who threatened you." She pressed her lips together and said nothing more, just stared at him with those wide, terrified eyes. Aldrich stood slowly, his mind racing. The ward triggers, the blood magic, the scratches on Lyria's neck. And now this. His daughter claiming a human maid had been protecting her from some unnamed threat. A threat that had apparently terrorized her into silence. He looked down at Lyria, saw her trembling despite his presence, despite the fact that she was surrounded by guards and walls and centuries of vampire power. None of it had kept her safe. But somehow, a perpetually late human maid had. "Stay here," Aldrich said quietly. "I'm going to fix this." He left before she could respond, his purpose crystallizing with each step. The maid, Mira, knew something, had done something, and Aldrich was going to find out exactly what, even if he had to track her across the entire kingdom to do it. Aldrich found the discarded maid's cloak in the servants' quarters, stuffed into a waste bin beneath a broken washboard. Someone had tried to burn it. Scorch marks blackened one corner, but had apparently been interrupted. He lifted it to his nose and inhaled. Beneath the smoke and rain, he caught Myra's scent. Chamomile soap, sweat, fear, and something else.
Blood.
Not hers, or at least not only hers. Multiple blood signatures mixed together, some human, some vampire. The fabric also reeked of shadow magic, the kind used to mask movement and presence. Expensive magic. Noble magic. Aldrich closed his eyes and let his power flow into the cloak. Blood remembered. It always did. The traces were faint, but he was old enough and strong enough to follow them. The trail led him out of the palace through a servant's gate, then into the outer city where humans and lower-class vampires mixed in crowded morning markets. He moved through the streets like smoke, his hood up, his presence suppressed. No one looked at him twice. The blood trail grew stronger as he entered the warehouse district. Here, the buildings leaned together like drunks sharing secrets, and the cobblestones were slick with more than just rainwater. This was where deals happened that couldn't happen in daylight, where bodies were found without questions asked. The trail led him up, onto a rooftop, then across to another, then another. Mira had been running, moving fast despite whatever injuries she'd sustained. Aldrich followed her path, with growing respect. She'd chosen routes that would be nearly impossible to track, using rain gutters and clotheslines and architectural features most people never noticed. But she'd been chased. Other scents joined hers, 3 vampires, all using concealment magic. Professional.
Trained.
The trail ended at a collapsed bakery, its front wall caved in by age or violence. Aldrich dropped down into the ruined interior, his boots crunching on broken glass and scattered flour that had long since gone to mold. Blood stained the floor here. Quite a lot of it. Aldrich knelt and pressed his palm to the largest stain. His magic activated, and the world lurched sideways as memory rose from the blood like steam from hot water. The vision hit him with disorienting force.
Night.
The storm raging. This building still mostly intact. Princess Lyria stumbled through the doorway, soaked to the bone, her nightgown torn. She was crying, terrified, kept looking over her shoulder at 3 figures in dark clothes materialized from shadows. Their faces were covered, but their movements were precise, trained. Assassins. One grabbed Lyria's arm and she screamed. Then Mira was there. She came from above, dropping from a hole in the ceiling with a rusted iron bar in her hands. She swung it like a club, catching the first assassin in the temple. He dropped instantly. The second turned, drawing a knife, a ceremonial blade with an ornate hilt, but Mira was already moving, putting herself between the vampires and Lyria. "Run!" Mira shouted at the princess. "Back door, now." But Lyria was frozen, so Mira grabbed her and shoved her toward the rear exit. The third assassin lunged, faster than human eyes could follow, and raked clawed fingers across Myra's arm, the same arm Aldrich had seen bandaged this morning. Blood sprayed. Mira didn't even cry out. She spun, using the momentum to drive her elbow into the vampire's throat, then brought the iron bar down on his knee. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the ruined bakery. "The king will hear of this," the second assassin hissed. "You're dead, human. You and everyone you've ever." Mira threw the bar. It hit him square in the face, breaking his nose with a wet crunch. Then she scooped up the fallen ceremonial knife and held it out, her hand shaking but her stance solid. "Touch her again," Mira said quietly, "and I'll make sure this blade ends up somewhere you'll really feel it." The assassins retreated, melting back into shadows. But not before one of them turned back. "The next new moon," he said. "When the king travels north.
She'll be alone then.
And you won't be there to save her." Then they were gone, and Mira was left standing in the rain with a traumatized princess and an arm that wouldn't stop bleeding. The vision faded. Aldrich remained kneeling on the floor, his mind reeling. His daughter had been kidnapped from her own bedroom, taken right past all his guards, all his wards, all his centuries of power. And a human maid had rescued her. Multiple times from the sound of it. He stood slowly and examined the room with new eyes. The first assassin's blood still stained the wall where his head had hit. The ceremonial knife lay half buried in rubble. Mira must have dropped it when she fled. Aldrich picked it up, and his blood ran cold. Engraved on the hilt, small but unmistakable, was the sigil of House Verdun. One of his own noble families, sworn to his service, trusted advisors for 3 generations. And they were trying to kill his daughter. The riverbank district smelled like fish and desperation. Aldrich followed Myra's scent through narrow alleys where laundry hung between buildings like tired flags, past children playing in puddles, past people who looked away when they saw his fine clothes. This was where humans lived when they had nowhere else to go. Her home was barely more than a shack. Wooden planks patched with canvas, a roof that probably leaked in 3 places, a single window covered with oiled paper. But flowers grew in a cracked pot by the door. Someone had tried to make it less miserable. Aldrich knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder.
Mira.
I know you're in there.
Silence.
Then, finally, go away. Her voice was rough, pained. Aldrich's jaw tightened. I'm not here to arrest you. I need to talk. I don't want to talk to you. A crash from inside, like something falling. A muffled curse. You made your position clear this morning. I made a mistake. More silence. Then the door cracked open, and Mira peered out at him with one eye. She'd changed out of her maid's uniform into a simple gray dress, but her face was even paler than this morning, sheened with sweat. Her left arm was cradled against her chest, wrapped in fresh bandages that were already showing blood. Your Majesty, she didn't bow, didn't curtsy. Just stared at him like he was a problem she was too tired to solve. If you're here to make sure I've left the city, I'll be gone by tomorrow. Just need to, she swayed slightly. Need to rest first. You're going to bleed out before tomorrow. Aldrich pushed the door open gently but firmly. Let me in. That's not a request, is it? But she stepped back, allowing him into the single room that served as her entire home. It was smaller than his closet. A narrow bed shoved against one wall, a table with a single chair, a basin for washing. Herbs hung drying from the ceiling, medicinal ones he noticed. Yarrow for wounds. Willow bark for pain. Nettle for infection. A healer's kit. She'd been treating herself for months. Mira sat heavily on the bed, breathing hard from even that small movement. Up close, Aldrich could see how young she was, barely 20, if that. How had he never noticed her before? Why? He asked quietly. Why did you protect Lyria? Does it matter? Myra's laugh was bitter. I'm fired either way. It matters to me. She looked at him, then really looked, searching his face for something. Whatever she found made her shoulders sag. Because no one else did. Because I'd hear her crying at night through the vents while I was cleaning. Because the third time I found her wandering the gardens alone after midnight, terrified and confused about how she got there, I realized someone was taking her. Taking her where? I don't know. She never remembers. They use some kind of compulsion magic, make her walk right past the guards like a sleepwalker. I started following her. Watching, Mira touched her bandaged arm with a wince. Fighting off whoever came for her. Aldrich's hands clenched into fists. How long? 2 months. Maybe longer. I don't know when it started. Only when I noticed, she met his eyes defiantly. And before you ask, no, I didn't tell anyone. Every time a human accuses a vampire noble of anything, 3 humans die as punishment for the slander. I wasn't going to get innocent people executed on my word against theirs. The ugly truth of it hit Aldrich like a slap. She was right. That was the law, his law, inherited from his father, designed to prevent false accusations against the nobility. He'd never questioned it before. The assassins last night, he said. They wore the sigil of House Verdon. Myra's eyes widened. You know. I saw. The blood remembers everything. He moved closer, careful not to loom over her. They mentioned the new moon. When I travel north. What did they mean? There's a summit in 2 weeks, isn't there? With the northern clans. You'll be gone for at least 5 days, Myra's voice shook. They're planning something for then. Something big. Lyria said they whispered about claiming the heir's magic and the old bloodline ending. I didn't understand all of it. But the door burst open. Aldrich spun, power flooding his limbs, ready to tear apart whoever had followed him. But it wasn't an assassin. It was Lyria. The princess stood in the doorway, chest heaving, her fine dress mud-splattered. She must have run the entire way from the palace. Guards would be panicking right now, searching for her. But Lyria didn't look at her father. She looked at Mira. Please, Lyria choked out, tears streaming down her face. Please don't leave me. Then she threw herself at Mira, wrapping her arms around the injured woman with desperate strength. Mira gasped in pain, but didn't push her away. Instead, she held Lyria close with her good arm, murmuring soft reassurances. I've got you. You're safe. I've got you. Aldrich watched his daughter, his brave, clever daughter, sob into a dismissed Maid's shoulder like she was drowning and Mira was the only piece of driftwood in the ocean. And he finally understood what he'd been too blind to see. Lyria didn't just trust Mira. Mira was the only person Lyria felt safe with anymore. The audience hall erupted in chaos. This is madness. Lord Verdon's voice boomed across the marble floor. He stood at the front of the assembled nobles, his silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers, his face flushed with indignation. A human? Guarding the heir to the throne. Aldrich sat on his throne, Lyria standing beside him in a formal gown, her hand resting on the armrest near his. Mira stood 3 steps below them, her arm freshly bandaged by the palace physician, wearing the dark blue uniform of royal guard. The sword at her hip looked too big for her frame, but she wore it without flinching. The decision is made, Aldrich said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. Mira has proven her loyalty and capability. She will serve as Princess Lyria's personal guardian until further notice. Proven. Lady Sienna, Verdon's sister, stepped forward with a serpent's smile. She's proven nothing but an ability to manipulate a lonely child. Who knows what lies she's filled the princess's head with? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Aldrich had expected resistance, but the intensity of it surprised him. Too many nobles seemed personally offended by this appointment. I invited no lies, Lyria's voice rang out clear and strong, silencing the whispers. She stepped forward, her chin raised. Mira saved my life. Multiple times. While all of you slept safely in your beds, she fought to protect me. Protected you from what, dear child? Lord Verdon's tone dripped with false concern. You're in the safest palace in the kingdom. Unless, he turned to address the crowd. Unless the maid herself staged these supposed threats to gain favor. It wouldn't be the first time a human tried to claw their way to power through deception. The crowd shifted, uncertainty flickering across faces. Aldrich felt the momentum turning. Verdon was good at this, planting seeds of doubt, making conspiracy sound reasonable. My daughter does not lie, Aldrich said coldly. Of course not, Your Majesty. But children can be mistaken, frightened by shadows, dreams confused with reality. Verdon spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. Surely a proper vampire guard would serve better than this. Girl. The proper vampire guards didn't notice assassins entering my daughter's bedroom. Aldrich let the words hang in the air. Perhaps because the assassins knew exactly how to avoid them. A chill fell over the hall. Lord Verdon's expression flickered, just for a moment, before smoothing back into concerned innocence. Assassins? Your Majesty, if there truly were such threats, the guard captain should be informed immediately. A full investigation has already begun. Aldrich stood, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. And I'm very interested to see where it leads. He let his gaze sweep across the assembled nobles, watching for reactions. Most looked genuinely shocked. A few looked uncomfortable. But 3, Lady Sienna, Lord Marcus, and Duke Theron, exchanged quick glances that spoke of shared secrets. All allied with House Verdon. In the meantime, Aldrich continued, Mira remains at my daughter's side. Anyone who wishes to challenge this decision is welcome to face me personally. No one moved.
No one was that stupid. Good.
This audience is. Father, wait, Lyria's voice was quiet, but it stopped him mid-dismissal. She looked up at him with those dark eyes that were so much like his own. There's something I need to say. Aldrich wanted to stop her, sensing she was about to cross a line they couldn't uncross. But he also knew that look. She'd made up her mind. Speak, then. Lyria turned to face the nobles, her small frame somehow commanding attention. You want to know why I trust Mira? Why I'm only safe with her? Her voice grew stronger. Because one of you comes to my room at night. The hall went deathly silent. Someone in this room uses magic to make me forget, Lyria continued, her hands balling into fists. Makes me walk through the palace like I'm sleeping. And while I can't see their face, I hear their voice. They whisper things. Terrible things, her voice cracked. They say my father will die. That I'll be alone. That they'll take everything from me unless I do what they want. Tears streamed down her face now, but she didn't stop. They say if I tell anyone, they'll kill all the human servants. Make it look like accidents. One by one, until I learn to keep quiet, she looked directly at Lord Verdon. They say the old bloodline must end for a new age to begin. Lord Verdon's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. Your Majesty, the child is clearly traumatized. These fantasies are not fantasies. Myra's voice was quiet but sharp. She pulled something from her pocket, the ceremonial knife Aldrich had found in the ruined bakery. She held it up so the light caught the engraving on the hilt. The assassins dropped this. House Verdon's sigil. Explain that. The hall exploded. Nobles shouted over each other, some demanding answers, others crying foul, still others backing toward the exits. Lord Verdon's mask finally cracked, rage flashing across his features, before he controlled it. Planted evidence, he snarled. Your Majesty, I have served your family for 3 generations. My loyalty is beyond question. Your loyalty, Aldrich said softly, will be tested thoroughly. Guards, escort Lord Verdon to his quarters. He is confined there until my investigation concludes. You cannot. I am your king. I can do anything I wish. Aldrich's eyes flashed red. Be grateful I'm asking questions before I start removing heads. 2 days later, Aldrich had insisted on maintaining the traditional market procession. Canceling it would signal fear, and fear invited more attacks. Mira thought it was the stupidest thing she'd ever heard. Stay close, she murmured to Lyria as their carriage rolled through the main city street. Crowds lined both sides, held back by palace guards in ceremonial armor. Vampires and humans mixed together, waving banners, calling out blessings. On the surface, everything looked festive. But Myra's instinct screamed danger. I don't like this, Lyria whispered, gripping Myra's hand. She wore a formal gown of deep purple, a small silver circlet in her dark hair. She looked every inch the princess. She also looked terrified. I know. Me neither. Mira scanned the crowd, her other hand resting on her sword hilt. Aldrich rode horseback ahead of them, resplendent in black and gold, acknowledging his subjects with measured nods. 12 guards surrounded the procession. It should have been enough. It wasn't. The attack came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The crowd suddenly screamed and scattered. Shadows pooled in the street like spilled ink, and from those shadows came the hounds, massive creatures made of living darkness, their eyes burning red, their mouths full of teeth that looked like broken glass. Shadow hounds. Mira had heard of them, but never seen one. They were illegal magic, banned for 2 centuries because they hunted one thing, and one thing only, royal blood. Lyria. Aldrich's roar cut through the chaos. He wheeled his horse around, but 3 hounds had already positioned themselves between him and the carriage. The carriage driver bolted, leaving the horses panicking in their traces. One hound leaped onto the carriage roof, and the whole thing tilted sideways. Lyria screamed. Mira didn't think. She grabbed Lyria and kicked open the carriage door, pulling them both out just as massive jaws snapped shut where Lyria's head had been. They hit the cobblestones hard, Mira twisting to take the impact on her shoulder. Pain exploded through her barely healed arm, but she kept moving. Run, she shouted, dragging Lyria to her feet. But where? The hounds were everywhere now, 6, 7, 8 of them. The guards engaged, swords flashing, but the creatures were smoke and shadow. Blades passed through them without effect. They're hunting her scent, one guard yelled. We can't stop them. A hound lunged at Lyria. Mira shoved the princess behind a market stall and grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a vendor's mirror, polished brass, used for selling jewelry. She held it up just as the hound attacked. The creature recoiled like it had hit a wall, yelping in a voice that sounded like tearing metal. Its shadow form rippled and distorted in the mirror's reflection. Mirrors, Mira shouted. They can't pass mirrors. She grabbed another mirror from the stall and thrust it at a nearby guard. Surround the princess. Make a circle. The guards responded instantly, grabbing anything reflective, shields, mirrors, even a merchant's metal tray. They formed a defensive ring around Lyria, angling the surfaces outward. The hounds circled but couldn't break through, their forms fracturing and reforming, confused by their own reflections. But it was a temporary solution. More hounds kept materializing from the shadows, and the guards couldn't hold the formation forever. Myra's mind raced. The hounds were tracking Lyria's scent, her blood signature. They'd keep coming until they reached her or until whoever summoned them released the spell. Standard tactics wouldn't work. She needed to think like someone who lived in the streets, not the palace. Her eyes caught on an iron grate in the street corner, a drainage opening leading to the underground tunnels that carried rainwater and waste beneath the city. Your Majesty, Mira shouted at Aldrich, who was tearing through hounds with his bare hands, magic crackling around him. I'm taking her underground.
No.
Aldrich started toward them, but two hounds intercepted him. Mira didn't wait for permission. She grabbed Lyria's hand and ran for the grate. A hound materialized in front of them, jaws wide. Mira threw her sword at it, not to kill it, but to give them a second's distraction. They leaped over the creature as it dodged, and Mira kicked the grate with all her strength. It flew open. Below was darkness and the sound of running water. Trust me, Mira said. Lyria looked at the black hole, then at the hounds closing in, then back at Mira. Always. They jumped. The fall was shorter than Mira expected, maybe 10 feet into cold, ankle-deep water. The tunnel was brick and stone, built centuries ago, barely tall enough to stand in. Dim light filtered through grates above, casting barred shadows. Behind them, a hound plunged through the opening, its shadow form coiling and twisting. But down here, with water and stone and no direct shadows to move through, it was slower.
More solid.
More killable. Mira pulled a fallen iron bar from the tunnel wall, part of the old structure, and swung it through the hound's head. The creature dissolved with a shriek. This way, Mira said, pulling Lyria deeper into the tunnels. They can track us, but down here we control the terrain. Above, she could hear Aldrich roaring orders, guards shouting, the city in chaos. But down here, in the dark, with water soaking through their fine clothes and the smell of decay all around them, Mira felt something she hadn't felt in the palace. Control. She knew these tunnels. She'd lived on these streets. And anyone who wanted to hurt Lyria would have to navigate Myra's world first. Aldrich tracked the hounds back to their source using a spell so old that most vampires had forgotten it existed. Blood called to blood, and the shadow magic left traces like poison in water. The trail led north, into the mountains, to a place that made his chest tighten with old anger. The Sun Temple, abandoned for 3 centuries after the vampire uprising, when his grandfather had driven out the human priests and claimed the kingdom. It had been left to rot as a reminder of vampire supremacy. Now, someone was using it for ritual magic. Aldrich approached on foot, his power coiled tight and ready. Dawn was still 2 hours away, but the sky had begun to pale at the edges. Not enough to harm him, but enough to make him cautious. The temple's entrance yawned open like a mouth, the great doors long since fallen from their hinges. Inside, torchlight flickered. He heard voices chanting. The coppery smell of blood magic saturated the air. And beneath it all, he heard Mira, shouting, fighting, refusing to die. Aldrich moved like lightning. The temple's main chamber had been transformed into a ritual space. Sigils covered the floor in fresh blood. At the center, bound to an ancient stone altar, was Lyria. She was unconscious but alive, her wrists bleeding into channels carved in the rock. Surrounding her were 6 figures in ceremonial robes, House Verdun and their allies. Lord Verdun himself stood at Lyria's head, a curved blade in his hand, chanting words in the old tongue. And fighting desperately against 3 vampire guards was Mira. She'd lost her sword somewhere. Her uniform was shredded, blood streaming from a dozen wounds. But she'd armed herself with broken temple debris, a length of rotten wood, shards of colored glass from the old windows, even a rusted chain. She fought like something feral, all desperate speed and Street Fighter tricks. She was also losing. One guard grabbed her from behind, arms locking around her chest. Another raised his sword for a killing blow. Aldrich's roar shook dust from the ceiling. He crossed the chamber in a blur, grabbing the sword wielder by the throat and throwing him through a stone pillar. The pillar cracked. The vampire didn't get up. The one holding Mira released her in shock. She dropped to her knees, gasping. "Impossible," Lord Verdun hissed, his chanting broken. "You were supposed to be occupied with the hounds for hours. You underestimated a human Maid." Aldrich's voice was death itself. "Just like you underestimated me." The remaining conspirators drew weapons, but they were scholars and politicians, not warriors. Aldrich cut through them like they were paper. One tried to run. Aldrich's magic pinned him to the wall, invisible force crushing his ribs. Only Lord Verdun remained, still standing over Lyria with his blade. "Stop," Verdun commanded, "or I finish the ritual right now. Her blood is already in the channels. One cut is all I need to drain her magic into me." Aldrich froze. The ritual was half complete. He could see the magic swirling around Lyria like hungry ghosts. If Verdun completed it, even killing him afterward wouldn't save her. She'd survive, but she'd be human, powerless, vulnerable for the rest of her life. "Why?" Aldrich asked, genuine confusion mixing with his rage. "I trusted you. Your family has served mine for generations." "Served," Verdun spat the word like poison. "We've knelt to your bloodline for 300 years while your family grew fat on power you don't deserve. Your daughter is weak, half human blood from that mortal woman you married. She'll destroy everything our kind has built. So, you decided to steal her power and take the throne yourself. I decided to save our race from your soft-hearted mistakes." Verdun's composure finally cracked completely. "You let humans walk freely. You banned hunting. You treat them like equals when they should be cattle. Your grandfather would be ashamed." A shard of colored glass suddenly sprouted from Verdun's wrist. He screamed, the ceremonial blade clattering from his grip. Mira stood 10 feet away, arms still extended from the throw, blood dripping from her fingers. "You talk too much," she gasped. Verdun staggered back from the altar, clutching his wrist. Aldrich moved instantly, crossing the space between them. But Verdun was already reaching for a backup blade with his good hand, raising it toward Lyria. Mira was faster. She'd retrieved the ceremonial knife from where Aldrich had dropped it, the one with House Verdun's sigil engraved on the hilt. She threw it with the last of her strength, and it flew true, burying itself in Verdun's throat. The vampire lord dropped to his knees, shock written across his face. He tried to speak, but only blood came out. Then he fell forward and moved no more. Silence filled the temple. Aldrich rushed to Lyria, breaking the bindings with a touch. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Father? I'm here. You're safe." Mira collapsed against a broken pew, her strength finally giving out. Aldrich looked at her, this human girl who'd been fired, hunted, stabbed, and nearly killed, who'd just saved his daughter one final time. "Thank you," he said quietly. Mira managed a weak smile. "You're welcome. Now can I please pass out?" Permission granted. 1 week later, The palace gardens had never looked more beautiful. Spring had fully arrived, turning the grounds into an explosion of color. Purple wisteria draping the arbors, white roses climbing the stone walls, golden lilies nodding in the breeze. The morning sun warmed the flagstones where nobles, guards, and servants gathered in their finest clothes. At the garden center, on a raised platform before the ancient Covenant stone, stood King Aldrich. Beside him was Lyria, wearing a gown of silver and blue, a genuine smile lighting her face for the first time in months. And kneeling before them both, dressed in formal black and crimson, was Mira. Her wounds had healed, mostly. The palace physicians had worked miracles, though she'd carry scars. The deepest cut on her arm had left a white line from shoulder to elbow. She'd told Aldrich she didn't mind. It reminded her she'd survived. Mira of the Riverbank district, Aldrich's voice carried across the assembled crowd. You have shown extraordinary courage, loyalty, and sacrifice in service to the crown. You protected my daughter when others with more power and position failed to do so. You asked for nothing in return and expected no reward. He drew his ceremonial sword, the blade that had seen 5 generations of vampire kings. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This wasn't a standard commendation ceremony. But a kingdom that does not recognize true valor is a kingdom that deserves to fall. Aldrich placed the blade on Myra's right shoulder, then her left. By the authority granted to me by blood and crown, I name you royal protector of Princess Lyria, with all rights, privileges, and responsibilities therein. More gasps. The title was ancient, created in the first days of the vampire kingdom. Only 3 people in history had ever held it. All had been vampire lords. You will have command over all guards assigned to the princess, Aldrich continued. Your word, in matters of her safety, supersedes all others save my own. You will be granted apartments in the royal wing, a salary befitting your station, and access to all resources necessary to fulfill your duty. He lowered the sword. Rise, royal protector. Mira stood, her legs shaking slightly. She looked overwhelmed, like she still couldn't quite believe this was real. Lyria immediately grabbed her hand, squeezing tight. The crowd erupted in applause, most of it genuine, though Aldrich noted which nobles clapped with less enthusiasm. Those would bear watching. The investigation into House Verdon's conspiracy had revealed wrought deeper than he'd imagined. 12 noble families had been involved, hoping to replace Lyria with a stronger heir once Verdon claimed her power. The trials were ongoing, but Aldrich had already stripped 6 families of their titles and lands. The kingdom was changing. It had to. After the ceremony, as nobles lined up to offer formal congratulations, Aldrich watched Mira navigate the attention with visible discomfort. She smiled when appropriate, accepted compliments with awkward grace, but kept glancing toward Lyria like a sailor checking for shore. Lady Helena, one of the few nobles who genuinely supported Myra's appointment, leaned close to Aldrich. She doesn't enjoy the spotlight. No, Aldrich agreed. She doesn't do this for glory. That's why she's perfect for it. Helena's eyes twinkled. The best protectors are the ones who can't be bought or flattered. They serve because they care. Later, when the crowds had dispersed and the sun hung low in the sky, Aldrich found Mira and Lyria in a quiet corner of the garden. They sat on a stone bench beneath a cherry tree, its blossoms drifting down like pink snow. Mira had removed her formal jacket and rolled up her sleeves. In her hands was a practice sword, wooden, child-sized. Lyria held a matching one, her face scrunched in concentration as Mira demonstrated a basic guard position. Feet wider, Mira instructed. You want to be stable. If someone pushes you, you should be hard to move. Lyria adjusted her stance, then looked up eagerly. Like this.
Better.
Now, when someone attacks high, you... She stopped when she noticed Aldrich approaching. Immediately started to rise, to bow. Don't, Aldrich said gently. Continue the lesson. I'm just watching. Mira hesitated, then nodded. She turned back to Lyria. Okay, I'm going to swing at your shoulder, slowly. Show me how you'd block it. Lyria raised her sword, intercepting Myra's with a wooden clack. She laughed, delighted. I did it. You did. Again. Faster this time. They practiced for another 10 minutes, Myra patient and encouraging, Lyria growing more confident with each successful block. Aldrich watched his daughter, truly watched her, and saw something he hadn't seen in months.
Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy.
No fear in her eyes. No trembling hands. No looking over her shoulder expecting monsters. She was just a child playing with someone she trusted. Your form is getting better, Myra said finally, lowering her practice sword. Another week and you'll be blocking real attacks. Will you teach me to throw things like you do? Lyria asked excitedly. That glass you threw at Lord Verdon was amazing. That was desperation, not skill, but Myra smiled. Maybe when you're older. Throwing things is advanced. I'm old enough to start learning now. We'll discuss it. Myra ruffled Lyria's hair affectionately, and Lyria didn't pull away, just grinned and tried to fix it. Aldrich's chest tightened with an emotion he couldn't quite name.
Gratitude, certainly.
Relief. But also something deeper. A sense that he'd been granted a second chance he didn't deserve. He'd almost executed this woman for being late. Almost dismissed the only person who'd truly protected his daughter. Myra, he said quietly. She looked up, still smiling. Your Majesty? Thank you. For everything. Her expression softened. You don't have to keep thanking me. Yes, Aldrich said.
Ido.
Because he'd learned something crucial in the past week, something that would reshape how he ruled. Power meant nothing if you were too proud to see the people who truly mattered. Status meant nothing if you dismissed courage, because it came in unexpected forms. He'd been king for 50 years, and a human maid had taught him what leadership actually meant. As the sun set over the palace gardens, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, Aldrich made himself a promise. He would be worthy of the loyalty Myra had shown. He would be the father Lyria deserved. And he would never again be blind to the heroes who lived in the shadows. Behind him, Lyria's laughter rang out as she finally landed a successful strike on Myra's sword. Myra pretended to stagger dramatically, declaring the princess victorious. It was the sweetest sound Aldrich had ever heard.
The end.